The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. The Prime Minister promises to spend 3% of GDP on defence, but refuses to say by when. Vodafone and Three finally complete the mega merger into the UK's biggest network, covering some 29 million customers. Plus, we'll hear from the UK's 19th Board Games Expo, which took this place in Birmingham over the weekends. Very good afternoon on this Monday. Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. We're going to return to our top story, and that is, of course, the Prime Minister promising to spend 3% of GDP on defence, but refusing to say by when. The UK will build up to 12 new submarines, 6 new munitions factories, and buy up to 7,000 long-range missiles, and invest in its cybersecurity and stockpiles of support equipment. Well, joining me now is Ian Martin, who's Director of the London Defence Conference and also the author of Making It Happen, Fred Goodwin, RBS and the Men Who Blew Up the British Economy. Ian, good afternoon to you. I want to get on to NatWest and the new world we live in with banking in a moment, but let's start with defence if we can. What's your take on what the Prime Minister's announced today?
It's a big moment for the government, the publication of the Strategic Defence Review. I think it's very positive that the government is now acknowledging that effectively we live in a new era. Those of us who founded the London Defence Conference a few years ago did it because we thought, right, the world is changing here. We're just going to have to spend more on defence, and we're going to have to be interested in defence across our societies and economies in a way we haven't been for decades, because the peace dividend is over. But the problem, and you got into it in your introduction, and I'm sure we'll hear more of this in the days to come, is that question of 3% when? Because if it is an existential crisis and we are on the verge of a war era, then what follows from that is presumably it's the most important thing you can spend money on. But we're going to have to wait a bit longer until the Treasury, I think, are forced into getting there eventually.
Well, that's what I find fascinating about this, Ian. And by the way, these warning calls are not just coming from people here in the UK. We heard from a very senior German military chief just over the weekend, saying he thinks it's possible Russia may well invade a NATO country in Eastern Europe in the next 4 years. By golly, if that's true, then 3% is surely not enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going into the next NATO summit, which is coming up in the next few weeks, and the argument there will be around 3.5%, with the American administration, Donald Trump, having demanded 5%. We understand that the White House is asking for 5%, but art of the deal again, will accept 3.5%. So I'm slightly surprised they're not yet even getting into that territory. I think you'll end up with longer term more like 3.5%, 4%. But it's obviously, it has to be recognised, it is difficult for the government. The economy is not growing. There are decades of underinvestment in defence when we came to think this didn't really matter as a subject. And people didn't think they'd even get to 2.5%. So it is progress. But I think those saying you need to get to 3.5 quickly are correct. And we have to understand what kind of threat we're talking about. I mean, it is what those of us who are asking for increased defence spending, we're not seeking conflict. The point of this is to deter. The point of it is to avert conflict by convincing Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, the CRINC as they're known, who operate together as allies, that actually the West and its allies take defence seriously enough that it is not worth trying something. And there are all sorts of options just for the Russians which fall short of the nightmare spectacle of invading, for example, a Baltic state. We know, and the Ministry of Defence has been very clear on this, that it's all sorts of other threats are in play with our undersea infrastructure, through which comes the internet and modern communications, our all of our energy infrastructure, There's also a risk. You've also got to think about resilience around civil infrastructure like reservoirs. So it's not even as just straightforward as an old-style invasion. It's a whole society thing we're going to have to get ready for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
In fact, some analysts might well suggest we're already in some ways involved in that almost subterranean war, if you like, with Russia. Just very finally, briefly on this, Ian, if you can. Interesting, extra investments for technology, not a surprise. For our nuclear deterrent as well, but not much talk about troops and about soldiers. Now, is that just old school because we're just not going to need them in the future, or is this just a bit tricky for the government?
I think it's tricky, and as the Defence Secretary's acknowledged, it is tricky to recruit. They are really struggling to get to the even lower number than we've had in the last few years. So it is a big problem. There's a bigger debate about, and you got to the heart of it there, really. Do you need an enormous standing army? And it's a subject which there is a heated debate. There's going to be, as Ukraine demonstrated with what they did yesterday in that extraordinary, audacious attack, you need to blend new technology with old-fashioned special forces style operations. That's how they did it. It was the new and the old working in concert.
OK, let's move on to talk about banking if we can, because obviously we have finally sold all of our shares as a nation state in NatWest. And that's quite a moment, isn't it? I think it is quite a long time ago, the financial crisis, when effectively it did have to be nationalised. And it's taken a long time, hasn't it, for those shares to be finally sold?
Yeah, I mean, I devoted several years of my life to telling the story of this disaster and this collapse because I was a baffled taxpayer back in 2008 as a journalist. I didn't understand what had just happened. How could this disaster end up costing us so much money? And I could have worked out then that lots of people involved in it didn't understand it either. And I always, when I'm asked about this now, still asked about it regularly, actually. People say, what does it really mean? The answer is that it was a much bigger disaster with longer-term consequences for the economy than we understood at the time. I think we thought because the bank had been rescued with our money as taxpayers, £45 billion rescue of RBS, and then more for other banks. But it had such a negative impact on business investment, on innovation. It just really damaged the fundamental mechanisms of the economy, like how banks create credit to lend money to smart businesses who want to expand and hire people. And we did avert, with the rescue as a country, we averted a Great Depression. But instead we had something, think of it almost like a Great Repression. We slowed down the effect, and still over the course of the years since, the effect on wages, for example, just of that repression, of that, of that hitting the economy has been calamitous.
Or indeed, when you talk about things like productivity too, or economic growth being pretty anemic really since, as you say, the comet has had a very long tailwind, if you look at it like that. And just finally on that then, Ian, do you think we've learnt lessons? Essentially, do you think we are, when it comes to the resilience of our banking sector, in a better place that something like that would not happen again?
The banking system is, yes, on the positive side, the banking system is much more secure, better capitalised. The banks are safer. But one thing I learned writing books about financial history is that there will always be disasters. It's just part of the process of capitalism. It's the kind of excitement and exuberance and hubris as people try and make more money. So you have to then have a banking system and a finance system that is robust enough to take these regular shocks, because they happen throughout history every 10, 20, 30 years.
OK, Ian, really fascinating discussion on both those topics this afternoon. Really appreciate your time. That is Ian Martin there. Well, let's look at how the markets are doing this afternoon. Delighted to say we can speak to Anna MacDonald, who is an investment manager at Albury Capital Management. Anna, always a pleasure. Let's start, if we can, actually with China and the United States. The White House seemed to be suggesting in the last 30 minutes or so that there is finally going to be a conversation between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, because it follows quite a lot of tension over tariffs and who's abusing who in the last couple of days. Lots of mudslinging, if you like.
Yeah, Trump accused China of violating the deal that they'd hatched out in Geneva last month. And then China categorically refused that they hadn't and started saying that the US had, with referencing in particular their revoking of student visas and some terms around semiconductor software and other aspects. So it was ratcheting up the tension. And also we had Hegseth over the weekend talking about how China's trying to become a sort of dominant power in Asia. So it did seem to be getting all a bit sort of tense. And I think that Trump wanted desperately to have a call with Xi, but Xi was really biding his time because I think he feels he has quite a strong hand to play here in terms of the US. It's going to take a long time for them.
We're just losing Anna there, who is in Edinburgh, talking, of course, about, as I say, that conversation that may well take place between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump this week. You are back with us, Anna, and you were just explaining the fact that, in many regards, you're right, China feels that it's, to use a Trumpism here, that it's got all the cards, or certainly enough cards, that it can play this in a way that doesn't necessarily mean it always has to fold into the United States.
Yes, I mean, China has really become a manufacturing superpower, and that's really something that is going to take decades to try and replicate. It's actually even hard to think about, as we've seen with Apple trying to transfer some of their manufacturing to India. It's not something that's simple to do because China has become so good at it.
Let's talk about Vodafone and Three if we can. I mean, we knew this merger was happening. Obviously, it had been approved by the competition authorities. But my word, they've brought a pretty big business together, the largest mobile phone network here in the UK.
Yes, it's now going to have the combination of Vodafone and Three brings together 27 million customers. So that is going to be a big deal. They've had to commit to invest £11 billion over the next decade. And also, with concerns from Ofcom and the CMA, they are going to have to ensure that they keep prices relatively in check, because there's now only 3 providers rather than the old 4. It's worthwhile remembering, though, that Vodafone, their biggest area, their biggest region is still actually Germany. So that's been a bit of a slower growth area. The UK has been better, and the real engine of growth is Turkey and Africa. So we expect to see this. This will make a difference to the UK, but it might not make as big a difference to the overall business as you might have thought.
OK, Anna, we really appreciate your time this afternoon, live there from Edinburgh on the Markets. Anna McDonald, thank you. We're just going to bring you up to date with some breaking news that involves the German police investigation to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. They are carrying out fresh searches in Portugal. That's according to the police in the UK. And we've just had an update now from the prosecutor's office, in Germany, who've issued a pretty short statement saying that as part of the investigation into the Madeleine McCann case, criminal proceedings are currently taking place in Portugal. These proceedings are being implemented through mutual legal assistance by the Portuguese law enforcement authorities with the support of officers from the Federal Criminal Police Office. So that is the German prosecutors essentially saying, confirming effectively that there is a renewed investigation into the Madeleine McCann case, cooperating with the authorities in Portugal. And we'll have more on that story with Jonathan Samuels, actually, on the News Hour at 5 o'clock. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll get the latest on the UK's tabletop industry after the UK's Board Games Expo, which took place in Birmingham over the weekend.
show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right, i.e. fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Very welcome back to Business Live here on Sky News. We've heard, of course, from the Prime Minister today announcing the details of that strategic defence review. We're going to hear from the Defence Secretary in the Commons a little later. But we've also heard just in the last couple of minutes from Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, in reaction to the government's announcement around defence spending. Let's have a listen into what she had to say.
Language around the government's announcements definitely not firm enough. We need to get to 3% by the end of this parliament. The world is getting more and more dangerous, and a lot of the things which they've announced in this strategic defence review require money. And I've always said that we need plans, not just announcements. Until we can see how it will be funded, it's just an announcement.
So the Conservative position is 3% by 2029?
Yes, we need to see it by the end of this parliament. Otherwise, many of the plans which they've put, even in this strategic defence review, just will not happen. We need to give certainty to the defence industry as well. We can see threats emerging globally all over the place, whether it's Russia or Iran, a terrorist plot foiled just a few weeks ago. A lot needs to be done to ensure that we can fund our defence.
There's been a lot of, scepticism over over the government's plans and whether they're affordable. Yours go even further than that. I mean, what would have to give to pay for that extra defence spend by the end of this parliament?
Well, exactly. This is all about the economy. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about defence or NHS or welfare. We need a growing economy, and our economy is not growing anywhere near enough to sustain what it is that we need to do, certainly on defence or even on welfare. We have to make savings. I wrote to the Prime Minister a couple of months ago talking about making significant welfare savings, making sure that we remain compassionate and protect those who really need it. But at the moment, we have astonishing figures, about 1 in 4 people who can work out of work on disability. That cannot be right. So we do need to make savings. But what worries me is that Labour is doing a lot of talking, no plans. They're all over the place. It's chaos. Whether it's the 2-child benefit cap, something they said that they would keep, now they want to scrap it. Same thing with the winter fuel payments. They were scrapping it. Now they say they're keeping it. We don't know when. It's just chaos, chaos, chaos with this government.
So do you think that that extra spending to hit 3% by the end of this parliament, could that be paid for entirely out of more savings of the welfare bill?
We need to grow our economy as well. And the way to grow our economy is to let business do it. It's business that creates growth, not government. And instead, what we're seeing is that the government is hammering businesses. Jobs taxes are killing businesses in this country. Every day I'm meeting people who are downsizing, others who are losing their jobs, and in some cases, businesses closing altogether. We need to make sure that we can get the economy growing. That's what's going to pay for defence. That's what's going to pay for the NHS. That's what's going to pay for welfare.
I guess the Conservatives were in power for a very long time. You want defence spending to go up now. Why didn't it go up to this level anyway under your tenure?
The last time we were spending 3% was actually under a Conservative government in 1996. We came in 2010 when Labour had pretty much bankrupted the country. We got savings and then we started increasing defence spending. We're the second biggest spender in NATO, for example. We led the war, the response to the war in Ukraine. So we've done everything that we could on defence. And if we were in government now, if I was Prime Minister now, I would be ensuring that we could do even more.
Since, I guess, the integrated review happened under Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister and you were in government, there seems to be a shift
from that piece of work to this piece of work, probably predictably, away from Asia and China and maybe more towards Russia and Europe. Do you think that was inevitable, or should there be a continuing focus on China as a threat as well?
I think we should look at what we mean when we say an Asia tilt. That included countries like Australia. This review, for example, relies on AUKUS. That's one of the things that came from that tilt to Asia. It's about looking at global threats, not just threats that are right on our doorstep. So I think that this is an evolution. So we're not against this defence review. There are lots of things in it that seem perfectly sensible. We haven't seen all of the detail. Our concern is about where is the money? Where is the money? Just making announcements without having money to pay for it is not being honest with the people. So I want to see them explain where they're going to get the money from and make sure that they keep that commitment to 3%. We saw the Defence Secretary say that they wanted to get to 3% earlier and then walk it back. Now they're talking about 2034. That's far too late.
I think that was Kemi Badenoch speaking a little earlier in Parliament, reacting to the Prime Minister's Strategic Defence Review announcement today. Now, the UK's 19th Board Games Expo took place in Birmingham over the weekend, bringing together the great and the good of tabletop gaming. One publisher that exhibited was the company behind such cult classics as Dobble and Catan. And delighted to say that company is Asmodee, whose chief executive is Thomas Kogler, and joins us now. Very good afternoon to you. Some big board games there. I've played Catan many times myself. I can see it in the background there. Just give us a sense of what goes on at these expos, if you like, and who goes to them.
Good afternoon, Darren. Well, it's yet another tremendous success for the UK Games Expo at NEC in Birmingham that happened last weekend. It's, I think, 72,000 tickets that were sold over 3 days, and that's 42,000 people that came. So some come from multiple days. And why do they go there? Well, they go there to discover new games, to engage with their favorite games. And you find people from all age ranges, from all origins. Our industry, the tabletop gaming industry and board games, are for everybody, and they just go there to enjoy, to discover and share.
And you produce some of the biggest names, as I say, in the market. How are sales? You know, in many ways, there is a lot of stuff fighting for our attention these days, most of it on screens. Are sales holding up? Are people still buying lots of board games?
Yes, sales are strong. Our industry is extremely resilient. What it means is that even in periods where there are some challenges on how consumers allocate their discretionary spend, board games are a relatively affordable leisure if you compare it to going to the movies or other entertainment industry that have become extremely costly for consumers to spend time together. Because with a game that's costing 20, 30, 40 pounds, well, you can play with 2, 3, 4, 5 friends for dozens of hours.
But is it keeping young people still entertained? Or, let's be honest about this, I mean, we're looking at some young people playing, but does it tend to skew older?
So you would be surprised. Actually, the tendency is that in the core of our industry is young adults. Some have become, I would say, less young adults, those that, like me, discovered games in the 90s and the 2000s. But you have also a whole host of the younger generation that is extremely connected, that spend a lot of time on screens, and that use games as a way to socialize. So they will take out a short game like Double, like Exploding Kittens, or a longer game like Catan behind me, to initiate the social moment with their friends. And you see a lot of people between 16 and 25 that play even more than the previous generation at the same age.
And just very finally, I've noticed, for example, Monopoly is now doing this in 3D form. You can physically go and play on it. Are you doing innovative stuff like that?
Well, we do some very innovative stuff. For instance, we have, you see on the screen behind me, we have a movie that came out on Netflix called Family Pack from one of our universes. We have some live TV game shows also that have aired on Canal Plus last year and are very strong. And then we do have some immersive experiences. Some escape rooms, for instance, happen in North America.
And finally, Thomas, if I had to pin you down and say, what's your favourite game in one word, what it is, or one game?
Well, my favorite game comes from my history, and that's why it's Seven Wonders, because it's the game that brought me back to gaming close to 15 years ago and led me to having this job.
Okay, good stuff, Thomas. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Sky
Thank you
News.
very much.
Okay, that is it from me on Business Live for this afternoon. We're, of course, back at 11:30 tomorrow morning. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it is the News Hour with Jonathan Samuels. Stay tuned for that, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.